Hi, everybody. We have a guest, Mayur here. He is going to talk about a special topic in a supply chain over his past experience. He had his kind of industry experience in the supply chain, and he has a several exposure into the middle mile transportation. And maybe we can pick up that topic, a small topic. Maybe over to you, Mayur. Uh,
Hey, Jishan. Thank you very much, and super happy to be here on the podcast. Thanks for having me. So, supply chain in general, and in that, the special topic of freight invoice auditing is I'm passionate about that topic. So, happy to share my learnings here. Uh, First question is why this is important to the business, and how do the business sees it? How does the in general industry currently is about it? So, when I
Before you go there, Mayur, I would like to understand that what is exactly does it mean by freight invoicing in a simple term?
Great. Thanks for asking that question, Jishan. So, uh, in general, if you see, when we order something on any of the e-commerce platform, you get items delivered at your home. So, how does the item comes to your home? So, before that, there is a complete fulfillment which happens. There are vendors, there are warehouses, there are shipping partners. So, when you see the different parties involved, usually you will see the e-commerce company will have a contract with the shipping partner to pick up the item either from the vendor to the warehouses and from the warehouses to the customers delivery. So this shipping partner and the e-commerce industry or e-commerce companies usually have their contract set that I will have this much volume going from this location to these different locations, and what are the rates that I can get. So even as an individual, we do use shipping partners. If you want to send something from Seattle to Phoenix in US or from Mumbai to Delhi, and we go to the DTDCs or UPS or USPS, and then we send them, and then you see the rate card, metro to metro, metro to non-metro, 2 day deliveries, 5 days deliveries. So just think that at like 100x or 10,000x scale for the businesses. And when businesses have that kind of a scale, they both negotiate for the rates. However, post that negotiation, when the actual transaction happens, the the courier partners end up billing the e-commerce companies for $1 million, $2 million based on the number of transactions. And then uh, the contracts are usually complex in terms of the rate card. There are different truckload, less than truckload, small parcel has their own nuances of the contract. So that's why it becomes so complex, and it need to be reviewed before it gets paid. Hope that kind of gives a fair idea about what exactly the invoice auditing is.
Yeah, absolutely. We can move on to why is it so much important?
Yeah. So in the current state, the way the overall supply chain is becoming complex, the businesses are becoming more and more global. And when you say the home deliveries and then the overall e-commerce industries are making uh, the overall fulfillment aspect, the logistic aspect, the contracts are becoming a complex scenarios. The industry is growing faster, and that makes it. If you see, for example, this e-commerce industry, the second biggest cost on the P&L is logistic cost. And usually, if you see as a business owner, most of the folks will start focusing on the business growth, marketing. How do I get more and more sales? And which is on the revenue side, or on the cost benefit side, they will start negotiating more on the seller side of it. That sellers or the vendor, how can I get the best of the price from them? But if you see the PNL, the second biggest cost on the PNL will be the logistic cost, usually 15 to 20% of the overall revenue. And it gets ignored because it is third party which gets used, how much influence we have, the industry expertise, the technology to look at it. But just from the cost or the impact on the PNL perspective, it becomes critical that how do we look at it. There are two, three ways to look at that. One is I'm able to negotiate better with the carriers for the contract itself. Second is whatever contracts is offered, whatever the service is offered, am I able to audit that I got the same rate, what got negotiated at the same time? Did I get the best of the rates as per the industry? And did I get the right delivery? And based on the delivery, am I paying it the correct amount? So that makes the impact on the P&L side. Uh,
Got it. Got it. So yeah, it's truly so diverse, and there are lots of statements there out there. So let's try to narrow it down for this discussion. Um, what is the problem, a specific problem statement that you would like to talk today about?
Uh, so Jishan, there are so many aspects of it, but as you mentioned that to be specific, and I like the way you are approaching this aspect. So I will just take one use case while giving the context here. So for one of my client, when I was working with him in going through the middle mile aspect, the truckload aspect, um, so there is a contract where it's mostly based on the miles. So truckload is in that way it's a more simpler contract in terms of the origin destination, how many miles, and that's how. But there are extra charges in terms of the detention. If I have to wait at the loading stage or the unloading stage, what are the toll charges? So there are multiple extra charges which comes into picture. So when we are analyzing the data, we have seen that almost 30% of his cost in actual invoice was coming from the extra charges, which was unplanned. So planned charge, contract, everything was smoother, but the 30% of that extra cost was making him worried when we got into data, why I'm getting that much extra cost. And then when I started reviewing the different costings, we realized there is a detention which was coming as one of the bucket. And when we started reviewing
Uh,
further, yeah,
Yeah, I'll interrupt there, Mayur. Like, you identified that there is a 30% of the charges which is getting more related to the detention part. But then, in a big organization, when you're working, it's very hard to really identify what is the real opportunity out there where I can work. How did you get to that part? Because why is it so important? Because as a viewer, whoever is watching our discussion, whichever team they are working in, they are looking for opportunities because it's the opportunity that drives their success. So can you just talk a bit more about it, that how did you identify that?
amazing point, Dishan. You're so right that once you are into the data, maybe it is you are able to find it, but how should I approach it, right? So uh, just to sit back and you are receiving an invoice from the carrier, where should I start? Is am I paying the right amount to the carrier, right? How a person sitting in that particular position will start it. So there are four-way that it starts, four-way match we call it. One is what is the contract that I have signed with the carrier, what is the delivery which has happened in terms of the order information. Third is whether the delivery has really happened or not, checking the delivery status, and fourth is the invoice. So person sitting to identify those opportunities should have those input to even start with. So first is understanding what all inputs I need to get into finding those opportunities. Once you have those inputs, you start comparing those inputs in terms of, okay, this is the contract, these are the orders. So based on the orders, what is the estimated cost that I should have based on contract? And for example, if I'm assuming that I should have a $10 million of logistic cost based on the orders that I have delivered over the last couple of months for the particular period, but I got a billing of 12 million. And when we
um,
are trying to, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, please
I,
go
I,
ahead.
I want to make it more and more realistic. Like, I want to experience with you, with this particular example. Like, in were you part of the Fret audit team, or the Fret audit team did not even exist, or which team you were part of, and then how did you pick up, let's see, let's try to explore this as an opportunity. I want to uh, go into a little bit of more part into that, and then we can move on
Yeah,
with.
sure. So Jishan, in a different ecosystem, I played a different role, me as an individual. However, at the same time, I also saw uh, the way the overall team structure, all this particular function got evolved in the organization. So usually in a higher level thing, you don't see this freight auditing as a concept getting a position as a department, but what you see is accounts payable team, right? So finance team will receive the bill, and then they will have that aspect of, okay, am I paying the right amount? And it could be a bill related to the products, it could be bill related to the logistic, it could be a bill related to any of the reimbursements. That's a more standard function in the organization. But when it comes to the freight invoice auditing in specific, it has so much of other aspect of the contracts and the deliveries and so much of data which is needed. You see that as a struggle in many organizations where the accounts payable as a function will not have that SME knowledge. that okay, how should I start? And that's where should I find those opportunities? That's where it starts partnering with the supply chain teams, the operations teams. All that noise starts, but usually it doesn't get a justified focus approach. And that's where people like me and there are other companies who are coming into the picture who provide this as a services, as a focus services. In bigger organization, over the period the team gets formed, that okay, before paying it to the accounts payable team, make sure that you are reviewing those invoices, and then once you review those invoices, then you approve it. Okay, is it partial approval, fully approved, or rejection? So that's how the industry ecosystem works. Hope that's
Yeah.
helpful, Kishan. Yeah.
Yeah. No, let me break it down. Like, my first question is that were you part of the account team, or were you part of the logistics team who's responsible for the auditing of the
Yeah, I was.
invoice?
So there's this concept called team called controllership. So controllers, financial controllers, are having a responsibility of how do you keep a control of the transportation cost. So it will be for each of the department, but I was part of the transportation controllership team. So when it is about transportation controllership, it has a couple of responsibilities. One is, are we paying the right amount? Second is, are we accounting the right amount? So it has both the aspect. One is the actual cost getting paid. Second is, are we accounting it in the correct buckets? So the financial reporting is one key aspect when it comes to the P&L.
Got it. Got it. So yeah, please go on. So it was a one fine day. You identified some data. Can you walk me through, like, what was like? Was that a weekly meeting over which you identified an opportunity? How it really looked like?
Okay. So it's interesting to see the perspective, the questions that are coming from you, Jishan, and thanks for making sure that we are having that larger aspect and not just a direct aspect of the issues. So what usually happens is you receive bills from the carriers on a weekly or a monthly basis. Depends on the pay term, depends on the cycle. So once you receive those particular invoices, suppose we are receiving, in this particular case, we are receiving it on a weekly basis from the carrier. Okay, this is what I have served you, delivered these many shipments, and this is the bill for that. So once we receive those particular bills, we have, in some organization it is a technical systems where we can compare. In many of the organization it is just a plain Excel which you receive, or through EDI 210 you receive those invoices, it gets into the database, you pull that from the database. Okay, this is what the transaction looks like, these are the different load, and these are the different truck IDs and all, and this is got delivered. These are the exterior charges, these are the standard base charges, fuel cell charge and all. You start comparing with, okay, are these my loads or not? These are the real loads which are given by me. That is the first thing which starts. Second is, if what are the origin destination contracts, and once you start that particular aspect, comparing that particular cost with the charges which are sent by the carrier. Third is, what are the extra charges which are sent. So many of the times the tools might differ, but the basic functions and the fundamentals remain same. Few people will just do it on Excel, few people will use some automated things in the query, few people will have, now as we are moving towards machine learning and AI, there are a lot of advancement which are happening in this particular industry, as the data and the complexity that we are handling is humongous. But coming back to the basics, we start comparing those aspects, and then you start realizing, okay, the example that I was giving, understanding that external charges, other than the base and fuel surcharge, the impact of the external was higher. And within that external, what are those charge codes where I'm getting the highest level of billings, and why am I getting it? Getting into the details. Do I have any communications over the emails or on the phone or anything noted down that, okay, these exceptional scenario, external scenarios happen on ground. So for this particular use case, just to complete the example here, where the actual contract was saying, once you are there for 2 hours of the appointment time, we will not charge anything. But post that, if truck has to wait at the dock door of a warehouse, or at a customer fulfillment center, then it will start charging $100 per hour for the next 6 hours or next 8 hours. However, in this particular case, when we deep dive into it, interestingly, what we found out was, because the carrier was coming 4 hours, 5 hours earlier than the appointment time, and then the first 2 hours it will not charge, and his calculation was starting from that 2 hours of the time. However, it was getting unloaded within the appointment time given. So in this whole mix, and hope you are able to understand, if the appointment time is between 10 to 12, the ideally after 12 the actual charge will start. But the carrier, if he is coming at 6 o'clock, then after 8 o'clock, 8 to 12, and it got unloaded at 11 o'clock. So from 8 to 11, $300 of extra billing, right? So from a carrier perspective, and many times it is unintentional. It is just a matter of understanding the contract terms very well, it understanding the things, how the appointment and the driver, and how the on ground system versus their contract, the drivers, and the ecosystem is bigger, and we can have multiple detailed calls about it. How does the driver, cabin, trailer, container, these are all individual ecosystems, individual variables, how their contract works, the carrier contract works with their actual driver. So there are a lot of variables in the supply chain, which makes it more challenging. And then that's why getting into the details, understanding their contract becomes important. But in this
So,
particular use
so
case, I was able to highlight it, and then we were able to save money for our client.
So is it right to say that it was not basically an integrity issue between the transporter with the carrier that the your organization was working with, but it was more like a systemic people system technology issue, and that would have led to an overcharge.
Absolutely. And most of our observation has been that means we don't start with the thought of integrity anywhere. It's and the complexities makes it difficult for each of the stakeholders to manage those things, whether it is duplicate billing, whether it is unmatched, whether it is zone to zone matching, whether it is weight discrepancies. Each of those, we see that either it is a changes which has happened, contract changes, people issue, processes issues, but identifying it, bringing stakeholders on the same page, and resolving it at a scale is what it is needed, and that actually helps make the supply chain more efficient. The higher impact is the more inefficiencies in the supply chain end up becoming, it adds to the cost to the business, and finally adds to the price and has a negative impact on the customer. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you walk me through what was the scope finally was overall about this problem, and then what was the consequences once you solve it, and maybe a bit brief about the how did you fix it as well.
Yeah, two things. One is identifying your initial question of how do you even identify the opportunity, right? So once we identify it, how do we bring everyone on the same page? How do we deep dive and try to find, okay, who is right, who is wrong, or it's like what exactly the things where the things are going wrong. And then once you know what exactly where the things going wrong, then the next step is how do we solve that. And in this particular case, it was just that the carrier ended up agreeing, okay, this is how it happened, and now going forward we will charge only post the appointment time and not before that. So this was more simpler scenario. It's just that the numbers, particular charge code to look at from that particular client had outbound small parcel, middle mile, and then LTL. So in that whole scope, this particular thing was very down in the list of impact. It's just that the scale, the technology that we have used, we were able to identify that quickly, and we were able to solve that. So in this particular case, we were able to identify, able to communicate, bringing stakeholders on the same page. Stakeholder carriers agreed to correct it from their end going forward.
Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think pretty much summarizes. I think that we are about to close the session now. We are end of the session. Maybe we can quickly run through about the identification of the problem and what it required, what kind of skills that it required. Like I can imagine, as you said, like there are lots of status code that you had to go through. There are lots of use cases that you had to go through. um, what kind of what would you suggest for a program manager or for the project manager who are deep into the shit of dealing with complexity and they are yet to identify opportunities? What's your recommendation on that?
So when I'm thinking about a new person approaching this whole ecosystem, one is a definitely domain knowledge. How do we understand the contracts? How do we understand the things which are happening on ground? So working with the carrier, working with supply chain operations people to make sure that, okay, what exactly happening? So in this particular use case, the driver is going early, 4 hours early. So it is a line haul. Line haul is like a longer shipments, and then they can go early there and stay near to the weather. So there are a lot of things which are happening on ground, understanding the supply chain, how, what exactly the things, how the contracts happen between the carrier and the drivers and all. Second aspect is analytics, the data analytics. The amount of data that we are looking at is so much in terms of the number of rows, number of columns, the variables, and also depend on which kind of modes that we are looking at. Small parcel has a different challenge. The value of the shipment, shipping cost could be lower, but the number of transactions and the number of charge goods will be very high compared to the line haul, where it is more simpler contract, lesser number of transactions, but the value of each shipping cost is high. Less than truckload. The freight class brings another level of complexity into it. So the domain knowledge and the data understanding becomes a two skill set of the knowledge functions knowledge that person need to bring to the table.
Let's talk more about the analytical piece of data understanding. And whenever we talk about data understanding, we talk about the SQL or machine learning or a Python. Uh, what would you recommend, like for a new guy who has been into the system? Like, first of all, my first question is that, did you work with the SQL before, or did you have to work with the SQL, or what's your recommendation? Like, if somebody is really facing a challenge, and you know that there's an analytical requirement, and since there's so much of a diverse platform and technology being used, what to learn, what to not, what's your recommendation, and how would you execute, somebody would execute his task in order to find the opportunities?
So great question, Jishan. I see that this particular aspect getting overlooked from aspect of how we can use the new tools which are available. So when I started my career, obviously it started with the Excel way back, almost 12 years back. So when we were handling it, most of the things were happening on Excel and the SQL. So definitely SQL is one thing that we use to make sure that we are getting the data, seeing the data at a scale. But with the advancement in the tools, we moved to the data visualization tools like Tableau and QuickSight and now Zoho Analytics. There are many tools which got available, Power BI. So in the current scenario, the tools availability is so high, and the people who can or should use that as a power to see the data here and integrate to the APIs of the world. And then I feel that the things have changed drastically, and it is so much making the things efficient now to use that. So tools will play a bigger role. One is a supply chain domain knowledge, what exactly things are happening, and then what input you need, what exactly the metrics that you want to see, how do you dissect those things. Once you have that, using these tools to make sure that you are able to see that at a scale, and even able to see different patterns. Using machine learning means that things can go at a scale where you are able to even think from a perspective that every transaction which is happening and you are getting into your system, how risky that transaction is. Going at a level where, okay, this is the things where I'm able to match these 20 different rules in terms of the pickup location is correct, destination is correct, the contract seems correct, this and so based on and how many of that particular origin destination combination I have received in the past where there were errors or there were overbilling. So trying to give a factor of this could be high risk transaction or this could be low risk transaction. So all those things can start applying, and we are working into the industry to make sure that we are using AI and machine learning as a help to make this system even more efficient.
Last question of this discussion.
Yeah.
You mentioned about that back then you used Excel and the SQL. Very stupid question. Did you know SQL before joining? And if not, then how did you cope up with that?
Oh, God. Okay. No, great. You're making me remember my those initial days. I didn't know about the SQL. I come from a mechanical field, worked in the automobile industry on the shop floor. So when I came to the logistic world of the e-commerce industry, I was not familiar with SQL as a skill set, but that was a requirement of the job to get it done at a scale. So I went through that learning myself, worked with peers, did some courses, and then used that skill set to make the impact in the industry.
Very well, Mayur. I think that the takeaway for me is that what it requires is just the will and the aspiration to solve the problem, and remaining things will be taken care of by itself. Thanks for joining with us today. I hope that viewers will be able to relate to you by all of these questions and then be able to take away some learning out of this session. Thank you being part of you
Okay,
here.
thank you, Jishan. Thanks again for having me. And always pleasure to talk about something I'm passionate about. And we'd love to talk more details about different aspects. This industry has so many. It's a growing industry, and I feel I can keep sharing whatever I know about the industry on the podcast here. So thank you, Jishan, again for the opportunity.
Okay, bye.